Hello and welcome to another video on this channel. So it's been a while, but I thought today I want to do a little review video, and the review will be about this little lens here, the Canon RF 50mm f1.8 STM lens. And yeah, I got it more than 1 year ago to bridge the gap between my wide angle lens, the 50-35mm lens, which I'm filming, and this behemoth of a lens, the 100 to 500mm lens. So with those two lenses, I already have quite some weight in my backpack, and yeah, I don't shoot that much between those, so in the normal range. So I didn't want to add another zoom lens, which weighs maybe 1 kilogram. I was looking for something very lightweight and also something inexpensive. And yeah, this lens here, this 50mm lens, it just weighs 160 grams and it cost me around 200 euros back when I purchased it. Yeah, and it's performing quite well. But I have to say, when I decided to buy it, I was a bit unsure because the reviews I've seen, yeah, they suggested that it's not that sharp, especially wide open. Center sharpness is okay, but toward the corners, there's not much to expect from this lens. And I wasn't sure back then if I should buy it, if it would be a good landscape photography lens. And that's what I want to use it for. So I don't shoot much portrait and other stuff. I want to have a lens to use for landscape and cityscape photography. So in this video, we're going to focus on this topic, and yeah, I want to share if this lens is capable when you use it for landscape or cityscape photography. And we do some pixel peeping now. I show you some 100% crops, and yeah, you can then decide for yourself if this would be also a lens which would be interesting for you to use. Yeah, so let's have a look now. And as a very first test, we're going to look at the first photo I took with this lens. So this is usually something you should do every time you purchase a new lens, do a first test. In this case, I did an indoor test. And for such a test, what I try to do usually, I try to find a relatively flat target, like in this case here, just some shelves on the wall where you have a lot of details toward the corners and also something in the center. And you can then use such a photo to check if the lens is decentered, how the corner sharpness is relative to the center, and basically assess if you got a good lens or if you might want to return it. Because as you've seen in previous videos, I was not always lucky with my lens purchases. For example, my 50-35 lens, I had to return it twice until I got one which was not decentered. In this case here, we have an image of some shelves, and also what I did, because the goal with the 50mm lens was to increase the detail compared to what I would get if I was shooting at 35mm and just cropping in. So here I have a second layer, if you see here, and on the second layer I've just taken the center area of a shot taken at 35mm with the 50-35 lens, and I zoomed it in so it matches roughly the field of view of the 50mm lens. Yeah, so let's just first go in here to the center area, and maybe let's use down here, we have some very detailed fabric, and we're now at 100%. This is the 50mm lens, and now let's switch to the zoomed in cropped version. You see, it's also detailed, but we have already noticeably less detail. Now, very interesting are the corners. So let's go to the corners. Let's go to the upper right corner. So here you see the 50mm lens, and I have to say I was shooting this at f9.5. So this is important. So this is the test for what I would typically use it when I'm shooting landscapes. So f9.5, also f8, it's very similar. We're also going to look at a wide open example in a second, but I wanted to test if this lens is good enough for my landscape photography. So here you see right out to the corners, pretty sharp, so no degradation in sharpness. So you see all the details. Now let's compare it to the crop. You see there's much less detail. Also, let's look here down at the bottom. So this is again the 35 frame cropped in, and this is from the RF 50mm lens. So you see there's a noticeable increase in detail I get from this lens. And still remember, it's just a purchase of 200 euros and just adding 160 grams to my kit. So based on that, I made the decision right after this test that I would keep this lens because it's added value, it's added quality. But now for this pixel peeping session, I also want to show you how it performs wide open, because there the story is quite different. So let's head over to Lightroom. So here we now have the same photo taken at f1.8. I have zoomed roughly to this area here. So you see this here, this is out of focus, so it's not because of the lens, it's just the shallow depth of field. But here you see the fabric. It looks quite detailed, but also not that sharp. Also, you have to remember we are a bit downward, so not in the corners, but not also in the center. But if we go from here now to the side here, to the edge, you see that here we still have okay sharpness, but then here the corners, so this area here, it's completely unsharp, undetailed. And we have the same if we go up here. You see here it's still okay, and then it degrades very swiftly in the corners. So corner sharpness at 1.8 is not very good, and also the center sharpness is not comparable to if you stop it down. So let's have a look at 2.8. So again, let's look down here, roughly where I've focused it. This is the plane of focus, and if we go outward, you see sharpness is improved compared to 1.8, but also still down here the corners are not very sharp. So we gain a bit more. So this area, the unsharp corner area, gets smaller compared to wide open, but still it's not usable if I wanted to use it for landscape photography. But remember, if you shoot wide open, this could still be a good use case if you do portrait photography where you have your subject in the center. Then it doesn't matter if the corners are not very sharp. So now let's see how the sharpness improves if I go to f5.6. This is what I consider a very good use case for the lens. So at this aperture, it's already very sharp. So let's just move outside now toward the edges. So here you now see even the edges are sharp. So still here some slight degradation in detail, but I'd say this is okay. So this is now an aperture f5.6, which I would also be able to use for landscape photography. Now with this knowledge from the first indoor test, we also want to look at some real world examples. And first I want to look at the street photography use case. Here's an example where I used f2.8, which we know is not perfectly sharp toward the corners, but for this use case, I have the subject here placed in the center. And if we zoom in, center sharpness is very good here, so sufficient for this photo. Also, we have a little bit of sharpness around the center, but then with f2.8, I get a very nice out of focus effect here for those dust particles in the air, which were nicely lit by the sunburst coming up from here. So in this case, we have nice out of focus areas, but the subject, which is largely in the center, is sharp enough. So this would be a use case where I don't worry about corner sharpness too much. Here's another example, again f2.8. So you see I rarely use 1.8 because it's very difficult to get what I want in focus into focus. In this case, I wanted a nice out of focus area here of the street in Essaouira and just the cat in focus. So yeah, the sharpness is not great, but it's good enough. So this is what you can expect at f2.8 in a real life shooting situation. And also this is out of camera, so no sharpening applied yet. Typically you can improve this quite a bit. Here's another example, this time 5.6, because here the subject, this little boy, is a little out of the center, so I wanted to make sure to get more sharpness there. And here you also see, if we zoom in, so the plane of focus, which is, I'd say, roughly in this area, if we go to the sides, it's going all around, so it's pretty good. And here you just see, okay, there's also a lot of noise present, but all in all here, the sharpness going all the way up, so plane of focus is intact in all directions up to the edges of the frame. So with f2.8, I would likely have a little less sharpness if we go up to this area. But here in this example, I want to now also show you how you can drastically increase the quality of such a photo. And I have another video on this topic, which is DxO Pure Raw. Currently version 4 is out, but they also will soon release version 5. And if we just apply the default settings on this image, which you see ISO 1600 is pretty noisy, we arrive at this result, which is completely clean and also a lot sharper. So what this shows, with today's software, what you can do, you can get away buying a cheaper lens, which might not be perfect in quality and sharpness. And yeah, by just applying some filters with a software which also costs less than $100, you get results which you would usually only get from a very expensive lens. And also here you see we also get a lot less noise. And I want to show you a few more comparisons now. So this was street photography, so you get an idea what you can do if you shoot a little bit more wide open. Now let's move to some landscape photography examples. So this here is a photo I photographed recently on a trip to Sri Lanka, f9.5, 2 seconds. Here it was already getting dark, so this is already the version where I pulled up the shadows and everything. So if we zoom in, there is good detail, but again, it's not perfect. You also see some noise creeping in, although I was at ISO 100. But now again, if we just apply the filters of DxO Pure Raw, let's zoom in again. Now you have a perfectly sharp and detailed photo. So this is, I think, the most important thing to note here. So the 50mm lens gives good enough examples, and what I showed you before, there was no sharpening applied whatsoever. So if you apply some sharpening also with default Lightroom, you get much better sharpness. But if you combine this lens with what software like DxO Pure Raw can do, then you have results you a few years ago would have only gotten from a much more expensive lens. So let's look at one more example. So this is a photo I shot in Prague, and this typical architecture or cityscape photo. Let's zoom in. So here we have very good detail and sharpness, though the exposure was perfect in this case. I didn't have to pull up any shadows, and you see throughout the frame a lot of structure here, a lot of details. Also down here, the gulls, very detailed. Everywhere, a lot of detail. Yeah, and just imagine if I now also applied DxO Pure Raw here, how much detail I would get. So this is really just out of the camera, no settings applied here. So if you expose correctly and have your focus set well, then you get very good details. Yeah, and this brings us to the end of this video. So based on the examples, you saw what this lens is capable of, and also very importantly, what you can do if you apply some post-processing. So in my case, DxO Pure Raw, I think, is the perfect companion for any camera lens combination, because you can really step up the quality. But even without it, I already get an added value compared to using a lens and having to crop in. So if you want to bridge the gap between some wide angle lens and some zoom lens, I think such a 50mm lens can really add value to your kit while not adding a lot of weight and also not costing a lot of money. And you can now decide for yourself if this is an interesting use case for you. And also, if you haven't yet, I really want to emphasize, have a look at DxO Pure Raw, because it's really a game changer, and you can just download a free version of it, which you can test, I think, for 2 weeks. So just try it for yourself. And now I'll leave you with that. See you in the next video. Bye bye.